Hi, and welcome to Code Tutorials. In this video, we'll explore the call to action block, which is part of our key blocks for Gutenberg plugin. With this block, you can create effective and inviting elements that would prompt your visitors to engage and act. The call to action block can be used to create elements in a variety of looks and designs. The page we're on contains some examples, as you can see. This block includes all kinds of options, and they can help you create a fully customized and stylized call to action. You can combine various typography elements, colors, images, backgrounds, and so much more to create your ideal call to action element. And thanks to that wealth of options, the block you make is guaranteed to fit with your site's design and style. And given that there are all these options available to you to try, we'll use this video to go through them together so you'd know how best to use them and the results you can expect. To start with, you'll need a page to work in. I prepared this one. Once that's ready, you can add your block. Blocks can be added either by clicking here on this blue button and then looking for the block you want. You can scroll through the block selection to see everything you have on your site, from Gutenberg to key blocks and anything else you may have installed. Gutenberg blocks are black, whereas key have red icons to set themselves apart. So if you find your block here, you just need to drag and drop it to the location you want on the page. However, there is a second way to add blocks. Let me close this so it doesn't interfere with the view. You can also add blocks by using this plus sign button within the page. It opens this pop-up window where we can search for the block we want by name. Once it appears, click on it to select and it will be added to the page. Now this is what the call to action block looks like by default. It has a button, a title, and some text to go with it. Of course, this content we get is just a placeholder. We'll be replacing it shortly. And to do that, we need the General tab. The options here include the title field, where we can type in a replacement for this text here. I'm going to do that now. Just a sec while I enter the new content. There. After that, we have the text field where we can replace the dummy content. That's this on the page, and set something new. I'll speed up here as I have quite a bit of typing to do. Just a moment. And there. Once you've entered your text, you have the following option. Button below. This allows us to set below which screen width we want the button to move under the text rather than stand beside it. This is done mostly for smaller screens such as mobile phones and tablets, where trying to squeeze the text and the button next to one another might make your call to action less clear or appealing. I'm going to set below 1024 pixels for my block. That's broadly the width of the landscape orientation on tablets. Okay. Following that, we have the Enable Link Overlay option. It can make the whole call to action block clickable instead of just the button. I want to use this, so I'll switch the setting to Yes to enable the link overlay. However, if I hover over the element, we can see my cursor doesn't change, and the call to action doesn't seem clickable at all. Well, this is because you need to set a link for it. That's done in the button settings in the Next Options tab. But we only have a bit of the General tab left to cover, so I want to finish that up before I proceed to anything else. So the thing we haven't covered yet is the Advanced section. It contains the additional CSS classes option. This is where you can create a specific class for this element, and then you can use that class and refer to it when creating CSS that would style your call to action block. Okay, that wraps up the options within the General tab. Moving on to the next one, Style. Within it, we have 4 sub-tabs, each for a different aspect of the element: title, text, background, and spacing. We'll start with the first one, title. It has options for styling the title text, starting with its tag. You can set anything from this drop-down. I'll replace the default H5 with the H3 tag, and we can see right away that my title is bigger and more noticeable. Then we can change the title color. You can select it using the slider, like so, or by clicking here to enable the field for entering a color code. I know precisely the color I want, plain black, so I'll enter its hex code to get it. There. It's hard to see now, but don't worry, I plan to change the background color later on. And after that, we have the title typography settings. In here, we have options such as the font family, which you can use to pick a new font from the hundreds of available ones. Then we have the font size. If you want to make the title bigger, then the tag change made it. I'll set 32 pixels here. Perfect. After that, we have the font weight option, where we can select if we want our text to be normal, light, bold, or anything in between. I'm going to use the normal 400 setting for mine. Next, there's the transform option. It lets us change the text to uppercase, lowercase, make it capitalized or normal, which is the same as the default setting. Then there's the style option for making the text normal or turning it italic or oblique. Following that, the decoration option will let us add a line under, over, or through the text. Finally, we have two options for spacing adjustments, the line height and letter spacing. Okay, those are all the options we have under typography. So those were the possible style settings for the title. The next one up is the text. And among the options here, we have the text color, which works pretty much like the title color. I'm going to change the default setting to something darker. It won't be quite black, but it will match the title. There. Again, don't worry about my text content being less visible. All that will change once I change the block's background. Alright, after the color, we have another set of typography options, this time for the text under the title. And if we examine them, we can see all the options match the ones we've already seen, so there's no need to go over them again. I'll close this up and we can move on to the next option sub-tab, which is for the background. The first thing we can do is pick the background type. The classic, which I plan to use, involves setting a background color or image. You can see the options for that below. But we also have the gradient. Let me show you that one. It allows us to set a two-color gradient fill for our background. So you set the first color here, for example this one, and then underneath we have the second color. I'll use something that will be contrasting enough to show the gradient transition, say this. And once you've picked your colors, you can use the two location options to set how much space each of the colors will take up. I'll just freehand some settings here to show you what the gradient background might look like. Then I also need to set the gradient type. The linear setting can stay for now. And finally, I need to choose an angle for the gradient overlap. And there we go. You can adjust the setting here to determine at which angle the two colors will meet. So this is what the linear gradient type looks like. The two colors meet following a line. But we also have the option of making the type radial. So the first color has a rounded shape and the gradient sort of radiates out. And you can use the location options with this type as well. Set the percentage of space that each color will take up, and that can increase or decrease the gradient overlap. And for the radial gradient type, we also get the position option. We can use it to pick the area of the call to action element that will be the first color's origin point. With the default setting of center, the color is right in the middle, but you can move it to, for example, center right, which looks like this, or top right, which looks like this, or, for example, bottom right, which looks like this. You can try out all the different settings to see which one you like best, but I wanted to show you a few so you'd get the idea. And that's generally it for the gradient background type. As I plan to use the classic one, I'll go back and select that. There we go. And now I can replace the default background color to make my text and title visible. To set the new color, you have this familiar color picker. So we can use the slider to pick our color or click here to make the color code entry field editable and then enter the specific color we want. I'm going to do that and make my call to action background color plain white. Perfect. Now, if you prefer, you also have the option to upload the background image instead of using a color. Alright, moving on. Our next option is border type. With it, we can add a border around our call to action element. It involves a few steps. For starters, we need to pick a look for the border using the border type option. I'll set solid, for example. Then I need to set a border width. As you can see, there are 4 fields for that, so we can enter a different value for each side of the call to action element. Let me demonstrate. I'll enter 5 pixels for the top so you can see. And there. Only the top side of the border is showing up. Let me clear that. I plan on setting the same value for all sides of the border, and rather than type it in 4 times, I'll click here on this little chain button to connect the fields into one. And now I can just type in my value, 1 pixel, and there's my border, all neat and even. With the border type and width set, I can now take a look at the color. Once again, we can use the slider to freehand our selection or use the code entry field to set a specific color. I'll do the latter. Give me a moment. And there. I now have this silvery gray border framing my call to action element. Okay, with that, the border settings and the background changes I wanted to make are done. So we can move on to the next options sub-tab, the one dedicated to spacing options. With them, we can adjust the spacing for various aspects of the element, from text to button. Okay, let's get started. The first option is for setting the holder padding. This allows us to set how much space will be around all our content and how far away it will be from the border. Now you can make specific adjustments to the different sides of the element, or you can add the same amount of space all around. Simply click to connect the fields and enter the value you want. Let's see what, for example, 100 pixels would look like. And there, all around my content, I have the same buffer of space. Now, this doesn't look bad, but I think my element would look nicer with more specific settings for each side. So I'll clear this and reset the value. Then click the same chain button to disconnect the fields. And now I can enter different values for different sides. For the top, I'll put 72 pixels. Then 74 for the right side, 78 at the bottom, and 74 again for the left side. After that, we have the text margin top option. With it, we can adjust the space dividing the title and text, this gap. So if I set something large, like 70 pixels, you can see how much space I get here. And that's too much for what I have planned. I'll reduce this to 17 pixels instead. There. Then we have the content padding right option. It's for setting the space between the text content and the button. Using it, we can add room here so the two aren't squished together. For this, I'll use percentages. OK, and set 6. Now I have a decent amount of room between the text and the button. This makes my whole layout look cleaner. Under that, we have the button margin, an option that can help us adjust the space around the button. It can also serve as a way of separating the button from the text on its left. However, as I've already done that using the content padding right option and I'm happy with the current button spacing, I won't be making any changes here. I can just show you, for example, what a change to one of the margins might look like. I'll put, say, 80 pixels for the right margin. And now I have this additional space which has pushed the button further to the left. But as I said, I don't plan to use this, so I'll clear the setting. So we covered all the sub-tabs and the options within them, and by now you might be starting to wonder where the button options are. Well, I'll show you in a moment. Before we do that, I want to briefly mention the last major tab we have, Advanced. The options here are something you get with every one of the key blocks for Gutenberg, and they serve to set how an individual block will look and act on the page. For example, there are responsiveness and motion effect settings here. While these options are undoubtedly useful as they can help you adjust the block positioning, background, border, and more, they affect blocks as a whole. They aren't specific to this particular block, so we won't be covering them in this tutorial. With that said, we can take a look at the button, and you can access the button settings by clicking to select the button itself. Think of the call to action as a composite element. It has its base or frame, the text content, and the button. So when we selected the button, we opened a whole new section of options. So we'll start as we did before, from the Content tab. The first section here, General, will help us tackle some general button settings, such as the layout. By default, it's set to filled, but there are two more possibilities here. There's Outlined, which looks like this, and Textual, which looks like this. I'm going to keep using the filled layout for my call to action. Then we can choose which button type we want. The default one is standard, but we also have the type with inner border. It looks like this. And icon boxed, which doesn't look much different because I don't have an icon set to go with it. But that's not something I plan on adding as I want to go back to using the standard button type. There. Following that, there's an option that will let us enable a button text underline. If I switch it to yes, then we'll get this line under the button text. But if I hover, the line disappears. That's because settings for the regular and the on-hover button display are different. We'll be looking at that in a bit more detail later. For now, let me set this back to no, as I don't plan on using the underline. After that, there's the size option, which can be used to set how big the button will be. The default one is normal, but we also have the setting for small, large, and normal full width. The last one hasn't changed because the button shares the element width with the text. If it were on its own, it would stretch out to match the width you set for the whole block. Okay, I'll go back to using normal as that's part of my plan design. Under that, we have the button text field, where we can enter replacement text for the one that came with the button. I want mine to say view more instead of click here, so I'll type that in. There we go. Then we have the button link field. This is where you can enter the target URL for the page you want to send your visitors to. As this is just a tutorial, I'll set a hashtag as a placeholder here. It will make the button seem linked without it going anywhere. And now, if I hover over my call to action block, we can see that my cursor turns into a pointer. That's because, if you recall, I enabled the link overlay option earlier. It made my whole block, rather than just the button, clickable when I set the link just now. After that, we have the icon option. This is where we can add a custom SVG icon to our button. I want to include an icon, so I'll pick one from my media library. Just a sec. This one? Okay. Select. And there we go. We can see the icon has appeared next to the button text. It's a bit too large to go well with the text, so the first thing I'll do is adjust its size. I'll reduce it by setting 6 pixels. There. Then we have the icon color option. With it, we can easily change the color of our icon. I'm going to make mine entirely white by setting the appropriate hex code. Okay, don't worry, I plan on changing the button background color. I don't plan on keeping my icon barely visible. Under this, we have the icon stroke width. Now, this option won't work for me given the icon I set, but otherwise it serves to change the width of an icon's outline, let's call it. So if your icon is more elaborate than mine and has a shape that includes an outline, then this option will help you change the width of that outline. Okay. Following that, we have the icon hover move option. This allows us to set if and what kind of movement the icon will display on hover. The default setting, horizontal short, looks like this. The icon moves, but it's nothing excessive. Then we have the horizontal move setting. With that, the icon blinks back into visibility. After that, we have the vertical, so the icon disappears and reappears, but does so along the vertical axis rather than the horizontal one. Then there's the diagonal setting, which looks like this. And finally, we can set none, which will keep the icon stationary on hover. I'll go back to using the default setting, horizontal short. That's this one if you recall. Other than picking the animated move effect, we can also pick where the icon will be placed, to the right or the left of the text. If I switch it to the left, this is what it will look like. For my plan design, I'll keep the icon on the right. Okay. Under that, we have the icon margin option. We can use it to adjust the space around the icon alone. And for this, I'll set 2 pixels at the top to align the icon a bit better with the text. And I'll also set 10 pixels as the left padding, which will create some distance between the text and the icon. Now when we look at the result, this is what it looks like now. And with this, we've wrapped up the Content tab within the button settings. And we can move on to the Style tab. Among the options here, we have the button text typography. The collection of options is the same as the ones we've seen before for the title and text. I don't plan on making any changes here, so I'll simply close it up. Following that, we have 2 sub-tabs. One contains the options for setting the normal button display, and the other one is for the hover display. Let's go through the normal one first. Here we have the text color option, so we can change the color of the button text to anything we like. I'm going to make mine match the icon color, so I'll set plain white here. Okay. Next, we have the background color. You can think of this as the button color. And for this, I'm going to set a tangerine shade that's going to make my button text easier to see and will make the whole button more noticeable. There. Then we have the border color. To show you that one, I first need to set the border width. Since this is just to show you, I'll quickly go through the steps. Click here to connect the fields. Then I'll set 1 pixel just to get some width. And going back up, I can look at the border color. Something dark would provide good contrast, and to make the border more noticeable, you can increase its width. However, as the border is not part of my planned design, I'll click here to reset the value, and then disconnect the fields to return the option to how it was. Besides that, I'll also go back to the border color option and reset that as well. Okay, those were the options for the normal button display. Let's take a look at the hover options now. Here we have the text hover color if we want to set a different color that would show for the text when we hover over the button. Like so. I want to have the same color for both normal and hover displays, so I'll add the hex code for the plain white color. Okay, and now if I check the button, there it is. After that, we have the background hover color, so we can easily set something that will clearly distinguish the button when it's hovered over. You can opt for something in the same color tone or something contrasting. I'm opting for the latter and setting plain black as my background hover color. There. And if I check, perfect. Now that I set my color, I want to show you the reveal background option. Before it, we have the border hover color option, but that works exactly like the normal border color that we saw a moment ago, so I don't think we need to cover it again. Rather, let's look at the reveal background as you might find that far more interesting. With this option, we can pick an animation effect for switching between the normal and hover background colors. While the default setting is none, so we have no effect set, the colors just get switched. However, you can replace that with the horizontal setting, then the hover color will seemingly slide into view. Or you can pick vertical, which will make the hover color appear from below. So this can be an interesting detail for you to add if you like. But with my design, I'm going for something simpler, so I'll just restore the setting to none. Okay. Under that, we have the border width option, which we covered earlier. Don't forget that it works in tandem with the border color option if you decide to add the border. Right. After that, there's the border radius option. With it, we can increase or decrease the curve of the button's corners. And if we examine the button, we can see that there's already some radius amount set by default. You can increase that. Let me show you using just one of the fields. I'll set 30 for the top radius, and then we can see how rounded the corner has become. Add larger values for all sides of the button, and you can change its shape to be more like an oval than a rectangle. Okay, that's it if you want to increase the radius. But if you want to decrease it and get perfectly sharp corners, then you simply need to set 0 for all sides of the button. I'm doing this using individual fields so you can see how the button changes as I go. Last but not least, we have the padding option. So this is just for the space within the button. The padding will cover the text and the icon as a unit. And keep in mind that by changing the value here, we can indirectly change the button shape and size. I'm generally happy with the default look, but I do want to modify it very slightly, so I'll set 14 pixels for the top, 40 for the right, 13 for the bottom, and 40 for the left side. There, perfect. With that, my button is done. We do still have the Advanced tab, but that is, as I mentioned earlier, something all blocks have. So the options here are identical to the ones in the Advanced tab of the Call to Action block. Since the element I wanted to make is done, I'll hit Update to save it. I think it did a good job of helping us cover all the relevant options for both the button and the Call to Action block. With that knowledge, you can re-examine the page we started from and break down each of the examples here. You've seen how to modify content, buttons, backgrounds, and more, as well as how to style all those pieces of the block. Hopefully, you found this video on the Call to Action block helpful and will be on your way to trying out this element shortly. If you have any questions after watching this video, or comments or suggestions you'd like to make, please drop us a line in the comment section below. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel and be the first to learn about any new tutorials and theme guides. Thank you for watching.